to another new episode of Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by my guest, Jim. Jim's had some experiences with a couple of well-known cryptids, and definitely looking forward to getting into the conversations with him. If you're a fan of the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, got some stories to share on that one. But his story that really caught my eye was his encounter with what could only be described as the Dogman. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting in and to diving into that episode. What can only be described as the Dogman. So I'm definitely looking forward to diving into that discussion, and should be a very interesting episode to say the least. But if you would like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, you can send me an email. That is tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com. We'll get you scheduled on a future episode. Find us on all the social medias. We're on Facebook. I have a Facebook group on there as well. If you have stories you'd like to share on there, you can do that. We have a Twitter, which I just created recently, so there's not a whole lot on that. Same thing with Instagram. There's bare minimum on those, but the social media platforms are there for a reason, and I guess I'd need to start utilizing them better to help grow this podcast out. Speaking of helping the podcast, if you leave us a review, be honest about it, write us a review, leave us some stars. 5 stars help the rankings. So if you really enjoy the podcast, it definitely helps out. And I definitely appreciate everyone out there that's listening and doing all that work for me. It definitely helps. But we're going to go ahead and dive on into discussions with Jim. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take the time to welcome my guest tonight. Jim, thanks for coming out and talking with me.
Hi, sure.
I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story. It's something that I've been avidly researching here in the last 15 years and kind of led me to starting this podcast. So talking to someone else that's had something similar is definitely a highlight to the investigations, I guess.
Well, I'm happy to be on and contribute.
Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciate it. Before we dive into your story, do you want to try and give a little bit of background, like where you were, what was going on, how long ago was it?
Well, it was about between 6 and 7 years ago. It was probably between 1 and 2 a.m. And it was in Newcastle, Oklahoma, or just outside of Newcastle, Oklahoma. And a friend of mine and I was coming home from a late night of taking in some friends that were in a band, some music out in Yukon. And like a lot of people, were you drinking? Were you on drugs? No, we weren't on drugs. She'd had a couple of beers, literally 2 beers in several hours, and I'd had 2 mixed drinks in several hours, but not a big drinking thing. And we were there to support local music, and I was wiped out because I'm a ceramic tile man, or I was at the time, and a lot of days in a row of tearing out subflooring and laying tile, and I was quite tired, so I'd let her drive my truck, and I was resting in the passenger side, and that's what led up to what we saw.
Before we dive into what you saw, like how far away do you think it actually was what you saw? How like good of a, for anyone out there listening, try and set the tone, I guess, of about the distance away.
Okay. And you'll understand when I tell my story, that distance is what makes my story, for me, listening for someone else listening to me, unbelievable. It's the part where I'm a believer. Let's say this. I'm a believer that Bigfoot is flesh and blood. From what I experienced and what happened with my friend and I'm a firm believer that Dogman is not flesh and blood. I do not, and I don't have a problem with anybody that believes any differently. I don't have any problem with people that believe that Bigfoot is a supernatural creature. I'm just not in that camp. I believe they're flesh and blood. And I have one encounter with that makes me believe that way, and my one encounter with Dogman makes me believe completely the opposite. And when you ask distance, I'll just tell you, it was, let's just say, 1:30 in the morning, and my friend was driving, and like I said, we've been working long hours, and I was just resting, eyes half open against the passenger door, and she screamed like a blood curdling scream. I rose up to see, um, a 6.5, 7 foot. If it was upright, that's what it would have been, I believe. But what I saw was about 5.5 foot, crunched over, directly dead center of the truck. And we were so close that we both braced to hit this animal creature. And there was no impact. And it went through the truck. It went through us and out the back end. It was like a swoosh of a gust of air. There's no way that we didn't hit it.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to avoid it. There was no way this giant creature went under the truck, and it had no time to go around the truck. And what I saw was pretty much, like I said at the time, I told you before that I didn't know what Dogman was. The best I could do was werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
There was an old meme that circulated around saying that there's $1 million in the basement. This is at the bottom of the basement. What do you do? And it was just like the creature that we both saw. I screenshot it, sent it to my friend. So I don't know if you have a question now or what happened after.
Yeah. Before we get into it after, your story actually aligns a lot with others that I've heard where these creatures or whatever they actually are, a lot of people don't believe they're flesh and blood. They think they're like an interdimensional, spiritual, demonic presence because there is a lot of stuff like that that happens with them, like just supernatural stuff that can't be explained. Like you drove a vehicle through it, there was no damage.
Right.
I know some people believe that, and I know what I saw, like it looked real to me, but I know like with other people, they've experienced something like where it just kind of like you see it real quick and then it just disappears. And a lot of theories out there are we're seeing into the realm of the other side, basically like an alternate. I don't know if it's dimension or reality or hell on earth. I don't know, but
Right.
it's like it's
This
bleeding
was
into
almost
us.
this was almost happened like she didn't see it coming. And when I raised up to look at it, it happened so fast that you really shouldn't have the detail that I have, but it was just like the clearest picture in the world. Um, I can't explain it. I don't know how to explain it any other way, but it was absolutely over the top terrifying. The visual was terrifying. Then, uh, just unsettling, disturbing, however you want to put it. The fact that it we both, saw the exact same thing. We were like big ears, long teeth, you know, uh, uh, saliva just dripping out of its mouth, long fingers with claws. And, it was just absolutely terrifying. But the fact that it passed through us, going about, let's say, 60 miles an hour, uh, and that we could almost sense the swoosh, the feeling of it going through and out the back
Like
was just overwhelming.
it's like the energy from it went through you guys and through the vehicle.
In a split second, yeah, yeah, and just a fraction of a second, and it was absolutely terrifying. But we looked at each other, and it was like, I know what she looked like. I'm sure I didn't look much different. Eyes the size of saucer, mouth gaped open, and then I just had to start, probably kind of animated. What did you see? What did you see? Her name's Summer, and I was like, Summer, just tell me what you saw, and she was like, uh, a panther standing on its hind legs. And I said, man, panthers don't have hands. They don't have ears like that, Summer. And she was like, I don't know, Jim. I don't know, I don't know what I saw. And I was like, okay, so long ears. And she was like, yeah, definitely, and we just, everything we saw was right on line with one another. I didn't want to uh, guide her or influence what she said, because what I saw was so unbelievable. I wanted her to say something different than what I saw. Uh, but it was, just a real short, brief uh, encounter that it's the only experience that I've ever had with what I would, refer to or think was a dog man. I've never had any other. I'm 57, but it was, like I say, over the top, and I don't try to convince people. I do, let people make up their own minds. I know leading up to this and some other things that happened in my life, I would be generally what I would call a 10 percenter. I'm a guy, and I gave it a 10% chance. I didn't want to be wrong. If they
Yeah.
drug one in or something happened that it was proven, but I didn't want to be that guy that poo-pooed anybody's beliefs or something like that. It doesn't mean that I was 90% against people that believe in anything like this. I was just 90% myself, that I just can't see it. I've lived in the woods in my life, and I've just like um, never experienced things like this, and so I would give it a chance. I didn't want to call everybody liars. There's too many uh, encounters and stories for them all to be wrong. But
I think there's definitely something out there.
I guess I'm sharing because I think mine's a little bit different, and the supernatural end of it uh, just is something hard for me to wrap my head around. So uh,
Yeah.
I thought I would share that anyway.
I know a lot of people are afraid to come out and say about the things they saw. I didn't talk about anything with my encounter for almost 15 years just because, again, when you say things like that to the average person, they're going to think you're crazy or something because
Yeah,
it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I am definitely, I lean towards thinking there's at least a possibility that everything that people tell me, there is some, I believe what they're telling me is true to them. It doesn't
right.
necessarily mean that they're correct or I'm correct. I always keep a little bit of skepticism here and there, but after encountering my own stuff, like you just can't explain that. So how could I write off someone else's stories if
That's
I,
pretty well the camp I'm in right now.
yeah,
Yeah,
like I've heard some crazy things here in the last year since I've been doing this podcast,
I
and
can only imagine.
the more I keep digging, the further down the rabbit hole I go. But it's definitely something I enjoy doing and want to keep
Yeah.
sharing the stories of others who experience something similar. I mean,
Well, props to you for bringing those stories to light and giving the people a chance to tell their story and uh, let people decide for themselves what they believe and don't believe.
yep, that's what I'm here for. I'm just a platform for everyone else to share their stories because for 15 years I didn't feel like I could share mine, but I want to be able to allow others to have that opportunity.
Right. Well, good for you.
Now, you said you've had some Sasquatch encounters as well.
Yeah, I have, and I'm actually the reason why Finding Bigfoot came to the show. Came to Oklahoma the first time. Uh,
Okay.
it had nothing to do with Dogman. Dogman's a completely separate story, and I have no other Dogman stories except for that. Now with Bigfoot, I floated the North Canadian River that flows through Oklahoma for 25 years, and I would float it all weather. It didn't matter if it was 10 or 110, but I like floating at night mainly. Uh, Pretty much one friend of mine and I would. And there were things that happened that, before when I said I was a 10 percenter, I was the same way with Bigfoot. I just, show me, uh, let me see one and I'll decide for myself. Well, we heard yells and knocks and even splashes. Now, the splashes are a bit tricky because there's beaver everywhere. And, you would have to see the rock or note that it came from the bank in some manner. And that happened to me a couple times where large rocks got thrown at me and a female that I had with us. And what caught our attention was the clicking of the rock, clicking the limbs coming from in the woods out, and then the splash in the water. And it's like they threw it directly at us. And I've got my theory on that too. But another thing with the Bigfoot deal, and this is prior to me believing in Bigfoot. Still did not believe in Bigfoot, but I saw 8 dead deer, one at a time, months or years apart, within the same 10-foot by 10-foot circle, let's say, on the edge of the river as we would float down. And I didn't then think dead deer Bigfoot. I thought dead deer poacher. And I, after about the second or third one in the same spot, I got out to examine the deer. It was a doe. There was no visible blood at all. I was looking for a bullet hole or an arrow. And so I reached down and grabbed her hind legs to roll her over and see if there was something on the other side. When I did, it was just crackling and popping all through its body. Every bone in this deer's body was broken. Every one of them. Legs multiple times. And after that, I got out on every one of them. And some of them were in the same shape, no blood, completely broken bones, head to toe. And there was maybe 3 or 4, maybe 3 of them that was completely mutilated, that had been ate on. And not believing in Bigfoot at the time, or not giving it any, credibility at the time, I wasn't looking like I wish if I could go back in time now for footprints and stuff like that around where this was. Now, we did go into the woods where a rock was thrown at us, but it was too grassy and no footprints. There was some more down spots and things like that, but that was basically it. Now, to skip forward to the one and only time in 25 years of floating the river that I claim to have a face to face with Bigfoot. My late wife was floating probably 3 foot off of the bank, and I was floating about 12 foot off of the bank. And we had friends with us, and they were behind us, two guys, and we didn't know because of how dark it was if they were 50 foot behind us or if they were a couple blocks behind us, a couple football fields behind us. So we wasn't paddling. And this wasn't all by design. It's just how it was. We wasn't paddling. We wasn't talking. We just had our paddles laid on our boats in front of us and just taking in the night sounds. And so we were two basically floating logs. We were completely stealth, not by design, just that's the way it was. And I was looking off to my left, my wife was to my right, and I heard her gasp real loud. And I turned to look at her, and she had turned to look my direction. Eyes were just wide as they could be, full of tears, and mouth open. And I was like, what? What? Like I was with my friend Summer with the Dogman story. I was like, tell me, what is going on? And at the time, I couldn't see. Uh, but something, you know, black and giant stood behind her, right behind her. This could have touched her, could have reached out and grabbed her. And being a tile man my whole life, I know measurements and I know what I saw. And what I saw was 6'6". That's what it was, about 6'6". But it was like 450, 500 pounds. It stared directly at me, and it took a quarter turn and took a step, and another quarter turn, took a step, and disappeared into the woods. That's it. Now, it took a bit for me to get my wife to tell me what she saw, but the story from her point of view was she was floating, skirting the bank. Her double paddle, there's a paddle on both sides, was sticking out almost over the bank. And she saw something dark coming up that was right on the bank's edge, and she thought it was a bush. She went to move her paddle not to get tangled up in the bush, and it scratched against the top of the kayak. Well, when it did, this thing jerked and moved and looked directly into her eyes. It was on the bank, crouched down, drinking from the river.
You guys
And
probably
because
startled it.
that's what that goes back to me saying, Dogman, supernatural. I can't say any other thing with me claiming that it passed through us and my truck. Bigfoot, flesh and blood, because I just can't wrap my head around something supernatural letting us, not on purpose, but basically sneaking up on it and startling it. It was obviously startled.
I can't see something paranormal, supernatural, whatever, interdimensional drinking water either.
Exactly, from a dirty river. Exactly.
Why would it need that? Why would it eat deer? Like, there's certain things that always make me believe that there's more to it than just
Right,
something.
right. And that's I am this is something that I've tossed around in my own head many, many a time and would listen to other people's stories and try to give them credibility and definitely not say they're liars or anything like that, but just my experience to their experience. Sometimes they hit and sometimes they don't. But it's going to be a hard sell for me to believe that Bigfoot is, whatever you want to call it, interdimensional, supernatural. And like you said, drinking from a dirty river and letting two, you know, a couple sneak up on you. And when I asked, probe my wife further as to what she saw, because she was so close, she was in touching distance, and I was 12 foot away at night. Uh, she just said that it had the craziest coppery, orangey, orangutan like eyes. Um, and other than that, less hair on the face, broad nose, pretty much the classic deal. She always, until she passed away, called it Littlefoot because she saw it crouch down and, it was 4 foot high or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she gasped and turned her head and never turned around back around to see it stand and what I saw standing behind her. I had a gun and it was a joke to think that I would have shot this thing. Um, uh, but people always say the comparison. Dogman, I was absolutely terrified out of my freaking mind. Bigfoot, it was just a helpless, hopeless, and both of them were, super close encounters.
Mm-hmm.
But the Bigfoot would have been just because it was so close to my wife, and I would just felt so helpless, and so it could have done anything it wanted to have done, and I could have done nothing about it. I could have emptied this gun in this thing, and I don't think it would stop anything that it wanted to do. It may have eventually, but not not as quick as I would have wanted it to do. Let's say, uh, but that scared, terrified feeling just wasn't there as much as anxiety and it was well, I mean, you can imagine it was quite an experience and quite a bit to take in a brief amount of time.
Yeah.
But um, that's my Bigfoot story. And then after that, on the river, um, I would take note of rock throws and try to do the difference between that was a beaver, that was a maybe, that was definitely a rock throw. And if you probe me on rock throws, I think it's them hunting deer behind a tree, behind some shrubs, something like that. And me and a friend come floating down the river, yucking it up, laughing, talking about owls or a bat just swooped by, and it gets them frustrated and almost childlike. They throw it in like a fit, like you're screwing up everything. I'm over here trying to hunt deer, bro. Uh, that's my thought on that, or at least with my experience, that's my thought on that. So, but anyway, and all of that, all my experiences with the Bigfoot was in Oklahoma City in what they refer to as the Stenchcomb Wildlife Refuge. And like I said, it's on an episode of Finding Bigfoot. Um, and I'm not sure which one it is. I really don't. I wasn't impressed, let's say, with that whole deal. When you roll with a crew of 20, uh, I just don't think it's going to happen for you.
No,
Uh,
I think I tried to watch that show when it first came out, and then
Yeah.
it got a little bit more over the top for me.
Well, that's, that was, like I said, I was in season 3, and that's the reason why I called him. Is one night, after it had happened and everything, uh, I was like, man, I lay tile and I cater. I lay tile and I cook food. I really don't give a flip about Bigfoot. But at the time, I was watching an episode, and I was like, these people are passionate about it. This is somebody that might share it with, because obviously he hangs out here. The dead deer, the rock throws, my sighting. And listen, when people say that was a guy in a ghillie suit or something like that, listen, this is the most mosquito infested place that you've ever been in your life. And uh, back when this happened to me, someone would have been shooting long freaking odds that somebody would come float by at 11 o'clock at night and they would get to do this. And by I say, do this, what did he do? Fake drinking water out of a river, stand up silently, turn and walk away? What was the joke?
Right? Like,
Yeah,
what
you,
benefit would that have been?
right. Yeah, you just burnt your ass off in this ghillie suit in the late spring in a mosquito infested deal to stand up silently just in the case that someone might come float by in the middle of the night. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. So anyway, I've enjoyed being on talking with you and sharing my stories.
I appreciate it. Like, I love hearing the stories of people that have seen stuff like this. Like I said, the podcast dabbles with all sorts of different topics, but
Well, if you ever get into ghosts, you can holler back at me.
I've got ghost stories. I've got all sorts of stories.
My girlfriend and I, we're from Oklahoma City, or we've lived in Oklahoma City for several years. And we saw a church and fellowship hall for sale in a town called Tonkawa, Oklahoma. And the church is 15,000 square foot, turned 100 years old this year in July. July 3rd, as a matter of fact. And we bought it. We saw it on Facebook Marketplace of all places, and just made the jump, bought it, turned the fellowship hall into a antique mall and boutique, and we live in the 15,000 square foot 3-story church house now. And there might be some odd things happen here.
Well, I'd definitely like to hear about that. Maybe on a future episode, we can
You bet.
go back into some topics on the paranormal stuff you're experiencing there. Again,
Sounds like a winner.
those are always the stories I like hearing, is when someone's actually experiencing it. So,
Well, now I actually live with it. Like I
yeah.
said, I'm 57, and haven't had a lot of experience with this either in my life. But now apparently I live with it, and that's okay. If they come here now, we like to always throw out there, in case you're listening, it's cool. We can all live together. Everything's fine. So, uh,
It is a little
anyway.
strange though that if it was a church, that it would have some sort of spirits behind it. Because I'm not a
Yeah,
super
I've
religious
I've heard.
person.
Yeah, I've heard theories on that. When good leaves, something has to fill that vacuum. It's not always evil or whatever, but I've heard theories on that, and there's a lot of history here. 100 years of there were scouting troops here. There's a basketball gym on the 3rd floor in the back that has been covered up and offices put in, but it's a over 100-year-old basketball gym still there, because the guys that helped build it told me that they just laid board over the basketball court, still had the lines and everything, and took down the basketball goals, and they're still there. One thing that's odd about our baptismal is that it fills from the same hole that it drains. Now, to me, that's kind of a horror story in itself.
Yeah, that's sounds strange.
Some some residual sins that don't get washed all the way down, maybe, and they come back up when you fill it back up. And some of those sins are still in bubble gum, but some of those sins are things that we don't even want to talk about. I gave a group of directors a tour through the church, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, that's a story right there."
Yeah,
So,
they claim water and stuff like that is a good energy source for channeling the other side. So,
there you go.
You might have yourself a little portal there and not sure about it yet.
It probably doesn't help that I want to turn it into a hot
tub. I don't know if they'd enjoy that or not.
I know it. We're gonna have to all have a meeting then.
No, well, no, I'll definitely get back in touch with you. I'd love to hear more about it. You can always reach out to me as well if you've had any more experiences. Like I said, I'm always here, so just shoot me a message.
Certainly.
But yeah,
it's been an enjoyable experience. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Jim. And if you'd like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, you can send me an email. It is tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com. We'll get you scheduled on a future episode. We're going to roll on out of here. So again, thanks to Jim. Thanks for listening. Good night, everyone.